The sun stands at its zenith, hanging overhead like a fiery eye, scorching everything down onto the arid southern plains. The air thickens, shimmering with heat rising from the cracked earth, carrying the scent of burnt grass and sand dust. In the center of this vast valley, a giant mass of iron and steel is silently taking shape, blocking every avenue of advance or retreat. That is the Grand Army of the Northern Empire, with a strength of up to 50,000 heavy infantry. Looking down from above, their formation looks like a giant metallic monster lying in wait. 50,000 large rectangular shields painted red, fitted together tightly without a single gap, forming a moving wall stretching more than 2 miles. Thousands of long spears stand erect towards the sky like a forest of sharp thorns, glittering with cold steel light under the harsh sun. The sound of metal clashing as soldiers adjust their ranks creates a murmuring, threatening sound echoing throughout the quiet space. Every breath, every movement of theirs exudes iron discipline and absolute overwhelming power, in complete contrast to that majesty and heaviness. On the right flank of the battlefield, a much smaller force is looming in the hazy dust screen. That is 3,000 cavalrymen from the wild desert. The disparity in numbers is terrifying. For every 17 heavily armed soldiers of the Empire, there is only one weathered knight of the opposing side. This cavalry unit does not look like a regular army at all. They wear no iron armor, no helmets covering their faces, nor do they carry heavy, large shields. On their bodies are only coarse cloth tunics fluttering in the hot wind. Their war horses are also smaller, gaunt but wiry, not armored like the horses of the Northern cavalry. The only visible weapons are bundles of crude, sharp javelins carried on their backs and short knives tucked at their waists. They look like a pack of wild wolves stalking an old giant elephant. The sound of a horn made of animal horns suddenly rings out, tearing through the stifling slints. From the center of the 50,000-strong infantry block, giant signal flags begin to wave, ordering the advance. The whole ground begins to tremble slightly. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of 50,000 people stomping on the ground at once creates a deadly rhythm, slow but certain, drowning out the howling wind. Red dust rises thickly, swallowing the rear ranks of the army. Meanwhile, on the right flank, the desert cavalry remains motionless. The war horses only slightly stomp their feet, snort, their eyes wide with alertness. The riders squint at the mass of steel slowly approaching. Their hands begin to loosen the reins, calloused fingers tightening around the shafts of sharp javelins. The distance between the two sides narrows. 1,000 steps, 800 steps, then 600 steps. The tension escalates to the extreme like a bowstring stretched to the breaking point. The unequal confrontation between numbers and speed is about to explode. The quiet space is torn apart by the sharp whistling sound of the wind, when 3,000 desert cavalrymen simultaneously spur their horses forward. They do not form a horizontal line for a frontal assault, but scatter into small groups, moving flexibly like yellow dust devils. When the distance to the Empire's vanguard is less than 50 paces, these riders suddenly turn their steering to the left, exposing the horses' flanks to the enemy. In that fleeting moment, thousands of strong arms swing up, releasing sharp javelins with terrifying throwing force. The blue sky is momentarily obscured by a thick black rain of javelins and short arrows. The terrifying whistling of wind pours down onto the heads of the heavy infantry. Thud, thwack, clang. Chaotic sounds ring out as metal hits wood, sharp points piercing through flesh. Although large shields were raised high for protection, but the density of the attack is so high that the defensive line begins to show deadly gaps. Javelins penetrate through the gaps between two shields, embedding into shoulders, thighs, or piercing through the helmets of the soldiers in the front row. Blood begins to stain the dusty ground red. The groans of pain are swallowed by the shouting of commands to hold the formation from the commanders. But the most terrifying thing is not the casualties, but the helplessness, just as the long spears of the infantry point out to counterattack. The enemy's silhouette has already disappeared. The desert cavalry team, after throwing javelins, quickly turned their horses around. Galloping out of reach, leaving behind mocking clouds of blinding dust. Meanwhile, in the rear ranks, frustration begins to spread like a plague. Soldiers holding heavy shields have to stand rooted to the spot, enduring the scorching sun. Sweat streaming down, stinging their eyes, while the enemy keeps hovering around like swarms of bloodthirsty flies. They roar in anger, wanting to rush up to mince those cowardly attackers, but military discipline forces them to stand still as bullet sponges. The second wave, then the third, strikes again. The desert cavalry gives the opponent not a second of rest. They continuously rotate. One group retreats to reload weapons while another rushes up to take their place. The right flank of the 50,000-strong army begins to waver violently. Shields weighed down by embedded javelins make soldiers' arms numb. The originally straight ranks have now become uneven and ragged. The strong smell of fresh blood rises, mingling with the smell of sweat, and the vague fear of a trap slowly closing in. Under the scorching sun of the late afternoon, the battlefield situation suddenly changes dramatically. Groups of desert cavalry, after hours of restless skirmishing, suddenly show signs of exhaustion. The waves of javelin throwing become sporadic and then stop completely. Provocative shouting is replaced by chaotic calls for retreat. All 3,000 horsemen simultaneously turn their horses towards the distant sand dunes, completely exposing their unprotected backs to the enemy's eyes. Dust whirls blindly behind the horses' hooves as if to hide the shameful flight of the losers. From the other side of the battle line, the commanders of the Imperial Grand Army observe this scene with burning eyes. Their patience has been worn down to the limit after hours of enduring the battle without being able to fight back. Seeing the enemy flee, the inherent caution of veteran military men is replaced by bloodlust and an intense desire for revenge. They believe that the opponent has run out of weapons and is physically exhausted. This is the golden opportunity to crush these mice who dared to stroke the tiger's beard. The battle drums beat rapidly, urging like a frantic heartbeat. Bright red signal flags are waved vigorously forward, ordering a general attack.
Kill! Kill! Kill!
The roar of 50,000 soldiers echoes through heaven and earth, drowning out the wind. The giant metal mass begins to move faster, breaking the initial solid defensive stance to switch to pursuit mode. Tens of thousands of hobnailed feet run thundering forward. Due to the impatience to catch the war horses, the tight formation structure of the heavy infantry begins to crack. Young, healthy soldiers run ahead, leaving behind their more heavily armored comrades. The seamless shield wall now shows countless deadly gaps. The ranks become ragged, stretching out explicitly like a wounded snake trying to crawl away. Meanwhile, in the distance, the desert riders maintain their speed, not too fast to lose the trail, nor too slow to be caught. They skillfully lure that giant mass of troops deeper into the rugged, rocky terrain, where the terrain begins to cause difficulties for heavy hobnailed boots. Red dust rises high, obscuring vision, making the pursuers unable to see the invisible traps waiting ahead. The Imperial wing, in a drunken delusion of victory, has completely forgotten the rule of survival. Never break formation when facing cavalry on open ground. They just rush on, ranks disordered, the sound of metal clashing chaotically, transforming themselves into a ragtag mob instead of a disciplined army. The distance between the vanguard and the rear guard widens increasingly, creating fatal weaknesses on both flanks without them even knowing. As the sun begins to turn a sickly red, casting the last weak rays down onto the thick layer of dust, the trap officially snaps shut. The heavy infantry army, after a long pursuit in red-hot iron armor, is now exhausted. Heavy, gasping breaths emit from tens of thousands of chests like the sound of overloaded blacksmith bellows. The originally proud formation of bronze walls and iron ramparts is now just disjointed groups, stretching endlessly across the vast plain. Suddenly, a sharp, ear-piercing horn blast rings out from the sand dunes, distinct from the chaotic retreat rhythm earlier. That is the signal of death. Almost immediately, 3,000 desert cavalrymen galloping at full speed suddenly pull the reins simultaneously. Horse hooves plow the ground, creating deep, long furrows. With superior control skills, they turn the war horses 180 degrees in a split second, facing directly the ones who are chasing them. No longer cowardly fugitives, they now reveal their true form as the most brutal assassins of the desert, taking advantage of the agility of unarmored horses. The cavalry does not charge straight into the head of the opposing ranks, where the long spears still retain some power, but squeeze themselves into the large gaps exposed between the disheveled infantry groups. They weave into the heart of the enemy like floodwater flowing into rock crevices, tearing apart the fragile connection of the 50,000-strong mass. In the first moment of the counterattack clash, chaos explodes terribly. The infantry soldiers, holding large shields and cumbersome long spears, are completely unable to maneuver to cope with the black shadows moving too fast at close range. The desert cavalry rides past the flank, using the horses' speed to increase the slashing force of sharp, curved swords. Slash! Slash! The chilling sound of blades slicing the wind rings out continuously, aiming straight at the wrists holding weapons and the gaps in the neck armor. At the same time, in the rear, other cavalry groups circle around the back, completely cutting off the retreat route of the Imperial army. They divide the giant troop mass into 3 or 4 disjointed segments, turning a unified army into isolated islands amidst a sea of men and horses. Warning shouts from commanding officers are drowned out by the rapid hoofbeats and the screams of those unexpectedly ambushed. The formation is torn apart from within. Imperial soldiers begin bumping into each other. Long weapons getting tangled make them bound prey within their own armor. The battlefield has now turned into a giant slaughterhouse, where the equipment advantage of the Imperial infantry instantly becomes a death sentence for themselves. In the narrow space, spears longer than 4 meters, once the terror of every enemy, now become miserably encumbering. The soldiers are squeezed together so tightly that they cannot pull their weapons back to gain momentum for a thrust, nor can they swing horizontally to parry. They are like crabs with bound claws in a narrow basket, helplessly watching the enemy execute them. On the opposite side, the desert riders have switched to using daggers and short curved swords, the ultimate weapons in chaotic close combat. From high on horseback, they continuously thrust sharp points down into deadly weak spots that heavy armor cannot cover. The hollow of the neck, the armpits, and the groin gaps. Each downward thrust is followed by a scream of terror, immediately drowned out by the thunderous neighing of war horses frantically trampling on fallen bodies. At the center of the encirclement, chaos reaches its peak. Thousands of Imperial soldiers are pressed together so tightly that many die standing without being able to fall to the ground. The weight of large shields, combined with the frantic shoving from all sides, causes their chests to be compressed, squeezing the air out of their lungs before the enemy's blade can even touch them. The sound of metal grinding against each other screeches, the sound of bones cracking under horse hooves, and desperate cries for help blend together to form a symphony of hell. The desert war horses, though small, are extremely aggressive, trained to bite and kick anything blocking their path. They weave through the forest of people, knocking down stumbling soldiers, turning them into obstacles, tripping their comrades behind. Blood flows profusely on the ground, mixing with sand dust to form a layer of thick, slippery red mud, making the hobnailed boots originally meant for gripping the ground now the cause of fatal slips. Meanwhile, on the outer edges of the chaotic crowd, attempts to regroup into a defensive circular formation by the commanding generals are quickly extinguished. Whenever a group of soldiers tries to raise their shields to set up a barricade, desert cavalry swarms in like a broken hive of bees, using the collision force of horses to knock away, breaking the newly formed structure. Not a single inch of ground is safe, not a single moment to breathe. Only blades and death surrounding from all directions. As the slaughter reaches its peak, another invisible enemy begins to rise, sinking the Northern Grand Army into a pit of despair. It is dust. Tens of thousands of feet stomp madly on the arid ground, resonating with the hooves of horses galloping continuously, churning the red earth into the air. A thick, suffocating curtain of dust covers the entire battlefield, obscuring even the setting sun, turning day into gloomy twilight. The vision of the infantry soldiers is miserably narrowed. They cannot see anything more than 3 paces in front of them. In that misty and stifling cage, fear spreads faster than fire on dry grass. Soldiers imprisoned in tight-fitting helmets. Only hear miserable screams, the sound of hoofbeats thundering from all sides, but cannot locate the enemy. Every shadow flashing through the dust screen becomes a deadly obsession. Panic makes their minds delirious. Sword blades begin to swing wildly in blindness. Not a few Imperial soldiers have fallen by the very weapons of comrades standing next to them in moments of terrifying startle. The command system, the backbone of the Imperial Army, has been completely paralyzed. Large command flags, originally lighthouses for soldiers to look at to maintain formation, are now obscured by dust or deliberately cut down by opposing cavalry. The generals scream until their voices are lost, trying to wave flags to direct the troops, but the response is only hopeless chaos. Brass, trumpet, and horn signals are emitted intermittently, out of tune. No one hears or understands the orders amidst the thunderous noise of the battlefield. Losing command, losing vision, the 50,000-strong army begins to disintegrate from within the consciousness. Primal survival instinct rises, crushing the iron discipline forged over decades. Soldiers in the innermost layers, terrified by the scene of being surrounded, begin to shove violently to find a way out. They trample on those who have fallen. Jostling and shoving causes hundreds to be squeezed to the point of broken ribs, suffocating to death standing right in the chaotic crowd before the enemy's sword can touch them. Taking advantage of that murky situation, the desert riders become even more terrifying. They know the terrain and how to move in sandstorms by heart. Like ghosts appearing and disappearing, they rush out from the dust screen, delivering a fatal blow, then disappearing into the void before the opponent can react. Their wild howling echoes from all sides, creating the feeling that their numbers are not 3,000 but 30,000, besieging every corner of the plain. The spirit of the Imperial Army officially collapses, giving way to a shameful and bloody rout, as the thick curtain of dust begins to thin slightly thanks to the evening winds blowing through. The tragedy on the battlefield becomes more apparent than ever. At this moment, the 3,000 desert cavalrymen no longer attack in a chaotic swarm style. Following the sharp whistle blasts ringing out repeatedly, they quickly separate, reorganizing into dozens of small triangular wedges, each wedge consisting of about 50 to 100 riders. Their tactics shift from comprehensive encirclement to dividing and destroying piecemeal. These cavalry wedges plunge into the crumbling infantry mass like hot knives cutting into fat. They continuously pierce through the weak connection points between the Imperial Army units, dividing the 50,000-strong army into hundreds of isolated islands amidst a sea of people. Communication between the army wings is completely severed. Large troop blocks are torn into small pieces. Small groups are separated into lonely individuals, completely losing the collective strength that was their pride. On the southern flank of the battlefield, a group of about 2,000 infantrymen tries desperately to re-establish order. By survival instinct, they huddle together, turning their backs to each other, erecting large shields outward to form a thorny steel circle, holding out waiting for reinforcements. Long spears are once again pointed out, bristling like porcupine quills, creating a living fortress amidst the flood of the enemy. However, their hope is quickly extinguished by the ruthless flexibility of the opponent, not rushing headlong into the sharp spears stupidly. The desert cavalry teams simply run around those defensive circles at a safe distance. From horseback, they continuously throw short javelins and shoot arrows at unprotected shins, or the gaps between the shields. Thud! Ah! Screams ring out from inside the circle as soldier after soldier falls. Every time a person falls, a hole appears in the shield wall, and immediately the riders rush in to gouge deep into that wound, breaking the formation from within. The solidity of the heavy armor now becomes a tomb burying the soldiers alive. Under the sweltering heat accumulated throughout the long day, combined with extreme stress and lack of water, hundreds of soldiers inside the encirclements begin to collapse from exhaustion before weapons even touch them. They suffocate within their own steel shells. Those still standing have their spirits completely shattered, seeing comrades around them slaughtered one by one without being able to do anything to stop it. Across the battlefield, similar scenes occur repeatedly. Scattered clusters of resistance are like flickering candles before a storm, extinguished one by one. The desert cavalry, with the incredible endurance of the desert horse breed, still maintains a frenzied attack pace, their hooves stained red with blood, trampling on the prestigious shields that were once the symbol of the Northern Empire's invincibility. The final collapse has finally come, not in small piecemeal parts anymore, but a total breakdown of a gigantic army. The massive block of 50,000 infantry, once dubbed the impenetrable steel wall, now melts like candle wax meeting a great fire. Sounds of retreat bugles or assembly orders become meaningless amidst the chaotic sea of wailing, cursing, and screaming for help. Defeat is like a landslide, a wave of panicked people flooding across the plain, trampling on each other to run, no longer distinguishing between general and soldier. On that shameful path of flight, items that were once the pride and symbol of the Empire's power are now ruthlessly discarded. The ground is strewn with tens of thousands of large shields, helmets, and finely crafted iron breastplates. To save their lives, soldiers are forced to shed the heavy protective shells, weighing them down to the ground. They run while untying armor straps, throwing away swords and spears, transforming themselves into the most naked, weak targets before the enemy's blades, just hoping to exchange for a bit of speed to escape. The sole target of that frenzied stream of people is the large river lying across the horizon. In their panicked minds, that cool water is the only salvation, the boundary between life and death. But that very blind focus has turned them into a flock of sheep being driven into a slaughterhouse. The desert cavalry team, veteran hunters, do not rush to block the head. They spread out into a vast arc formation, herding the remnants running in a single direction, like a pack of wolves herding a herd of deer into a dead-end canyon. The pursuit takes place brutally and one-sidedly. Cavalrymen gallop, chasing after shadowy figures staggering from exhaustion. From behind, curved blades swing up and down rhythmically like the hammers of death. The infantry soldiers, with no weapons, no armor, no fighting spirit, only know to expose their backs to take the hits. They fall flat in rows like ripe rice meeting a storm. Blood sprays in jets, dyeing the streaks of dry burnt grass red. There is no resistance, only desperate gasps and the sound of blades cutting into flesh. When the first groups of soldiers reach the riverbank, the tragedy becomes even more tragic. The steep and slippery riverbank causes hundreds to lose their footing, rolling down into the fast current. Those arriving later, too terrified of the pursuing swords behind their backs, rush blindly down, crushing those before them. The once gentle river instantly turns into a quagmire of corpses and struggle. The desert cavalry stops on the high bank, coldly pouring final rains of arrows down onto the crowd struggling in the water, ending all hope of escape for the northern wing. The sun finally disappears behind the rocky mountain ranges in the west, pulling the last blood-red rays off the ground, giving way to the cold night beginning to fall. The battlefield, where just a few hours ago was a cauldron of roaring screams, clashing metal, and thundering hoofbeats, now sinks into a terrifying silence. That silence is so heavy that the sound of wind blowing through dry grass bushes or the sound of vultures flapping their wings landing echoes clearly like thunder. On the vast plain, a horrifying scene of carnage stretches as far as the eye can see. Tens of thousands of bodies lie piled up on each other, forming strange, uneven mounds. The shiny iron armor sets, the pride of the Northern Army, are now distorted, cracked, reflecting the dim moonlight in a ghostly way. Signal flags that once flew proudly now lie tattered, trampled under mud mixed with blood that has begun to clot into black patches. No longer the appearance of a mighty army, only a giant graveyard of iron, steel, and flesh remains. The desert cavalry team, after completing the final pursuit by the riverbank, begins to withdraw following the deep sound of a horn. They do not cheer to celebrate victory noisily. Those weather-beaten warriors quietly gather on a high hill slope, looking down at the work of destruction they have just created. 3,000 men and horses, though tired and covered in dust, still exude a cold, murderous aura. They wipe their weapons, count their numbers, and bandage minor wounds. Every action takes place in order and discipline. Looking down from above, the giant metal mass that once threatened to swallow the whole world is now just piles of motionless scrap. This victory is not only a tactical dominance, but the collapse of an old warfare mindset before deadly flexibility. 50,000 heavily armed troops have been completely wiped out by 3,000 crudely equipped cavalry, a horrific casualty rate that will be mentioned in military chronicles for hundreds of years to come. Under the cold moonlight, the horse shadows begin to turn, silently leaving towards the desert, disappearing into the night like ghosts that never existed. Only the night wind remains blowing gently across the battlefield, carrying the strong smell of death far away, signaling the end of an undefeated legend.